So, Rollin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about you. What's your personal story?
My personal story is I'm 21 years old. My birthday's in a few days, so I'll be 22 on the 9th. But I kind of grew up all over the place. My parents were originally from Kentucky, but I lived in Japan for 5 years. And then I also lived in Geneva, Switzerland for 4 years. And I moved to Los Angeles when I was 12. I studied ceramics at Bennington College for 1 year before dropping out and moving to New York. And I lived in New York for a year, and I worked construction, and I applied to architecture schools, and now I'm at the Cooper Union.
Yeah. How did you decide to become an architect while in New York, or?
It started honestly when I was a senior in high school. I played in the jazz band, and I always did the art shows, but I was also in, calculus and physics, and those were the two classes I was kind of good at. But I could never find a way to merge my love for mathematics and science with this more artistic, creative side of me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to Bennington, I was actually suggested that I do a ceramics and architecture course as kind of a supplemental part of my education. And I just kind of fell in love with it. I had a great professor named Anthony Titus who, showed me the ways of Cooper education at Bennington.
And what are these ways?
A very informed pedagogy that doesn't focus particularly on architecture, but it focuses more on historical context, and also this idea of creating narrative and story around architecture and using it more as an exploratory platform rather than just a means to build.
How did you apply to architecture schools? When did you decide to do that, and how did you apply?
I applied to architecture schools through the architecture school portfolio review as a way to aid me because, I was 19. I had no idea what architecture school was going to be. And to be quite honest, before I did do that mentoring, I had no idea. I had no actual idea of the difficulties and challenges of an architectural education and what it takes to be a successful student in architecture. Doesn't necessarily mean good grades, but actually get something from the pedagogy. So I started applying when I was 19. I applied to 10 or 12 different schools.
How'd you do? Get into most of them, or?
I got into every school except for Washington, St. Louis, and USC.
All right. So which other schools other than Cooper did you get into?
I got into RISD, Pratt. I got into the Art Institute of Chicago with almost a full scholarship. But where else did I get in?
How much is Cooper, by the way? You said scholarship. Cooper is pretty affordable, but it used to be free. But now I think they started charging tuition, right?
It's roughly $20,000 a year, which is
nothing. That's like a third of any school. It's great. Especially for New York, it makes no sense.
Yeah,
people still complain.
Yeah, I do think we do have a plan in the next 10 years to get back to being free, but we'll see how that goes.
I see. What are you doing while at Cooper now? Let's talk a little bit about your experience there. I read that you a little bit of research myself, and it looks like you are involved with some extracurricular activities, and you've done an exhibit as well as you work as you're offering tours to people around Cooper. Is that true? Or?
No, not. There was at one point I gave a little talk at the end of last summer. I was supposed to give a talk, but some complications happened to all the alumni regarding this exhibition that I did in the former Village Voice building at Cooper Square called Abeji. And we were very lucky to have my peers and I to have the North American Sculpture Center sponsor us and pay for the materials and let us use their CNCs. That was a great experience.
And describe that experience more a little bit. What was the exhibit about?
So it was as part of a structures course, and we had to basically design a structural object that would exist within a very minimal space that can move, be held together, be very kind of monolithic and take up a presence, but also be structurally sound. So we use friction joints and compression ropes with no explicit use of glue. And it's difficult for me to explain without some of the orthographic drawings here to explain some of the concepts more in depth.
Maybe you can forward it to me and I can.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll do that.
I can edit it in. So about your education at Cooper, what are the pros and cons, I guess, of that particular school? I mean, what do you like? What do you dislike about it?
What I love about Cooper is the culture and attitude towards learning, which is that it is not necessarily a means to an end, but it is an ongoing process. And I see it with my professors, which is the relationship kind of transcends the professor-student relationship to where you're both learning from each other. It's more of like a reciprocal relationship, which I find to be extremely helpful. Some of the cons I would say at Cooper, I mean, of the very few that there are, is, I mean, and this is prevalent at every architecture school, so this is not unique to Cooper Union, which is, I would say that studio culture can be a little limiting in what it exposes students to. The expectation to spend a majority of your week within a singular room within the studio, unless it's, absolutely necessary, I find will not give you reference or experience outside of that environment to apply to your design studio.
So what is your proposed alternative to doing work mostly in the studio?
Sorry, repeat that question.
What's the alternative to that method?
Basically efficient time management. Because I find that a lot of people kind of use the studio. This is maybe my opinion, but they're still in the studio when they don't need to be. And being in New York City, there is so much to see and learn and experience every single day that you could bring into the studio, and it can help you as a designer, as a person, as a learner. I don't think there necessarily is an alternative because the amount of work that architecture takes. I mean, to be honest, if I didn't need to sleep, I probably wouldn't sleep. But everyone has to sleep.
Yeah, I remember when I was an architecture student. I spent a lot of hours in the architecture studio, but I was not the only one. But that was mainly because of my insecurity of, have I done enough? It was never enough, and it was never enough for anybody.
Right.
But it's not a curricular requirement that you spend the time in the studio. You have a requirement for about 12 hours a week to be in the studio, and then after that, you're okay. But so you're saying that most people spend way too much time in the studio because they don't manage their time as well, right?
Exactly. I guess really what I'm trying to say is that architecture school really comes down to time management and priorities, because you were going to be taking, I was taking 19 credits my first semester, including design studio, so that's like 6 classes.
Yeah.
You have to prioritize what work is going to benefit you in the long run.
How do you do that?
How do I do that? Educated guesses. No, generally I kind of
reciprocate. The thing is that there's one studio per semester.
Right.
Which is supposed to be the most important thing in your education. Therefore, based on your hierarchy,
its studio is always number one. That's just right. That I feel like that's just given. I feel
right.
But outside of that, at Cooper, it kind of the pecking order, which is like history of architecture, and I would say environments and structures is pretty important. And then not the actual history of architecture classes, but the liberal arts classes are at the very bottom of the pecking order.
And you feel that it should be that hierarchy is different?
A little bit. I feel that it is important to have a holistic education, that maybe it would be more useful for schools to consider intertwining a lot of these 2 credit classes into the studio.
Oh, can you be a little more specific in how you mean that?
For example, so structures is a supplemental class that informs your studio design. Why, instead of having that 3 hours outside of the studio within a lecture hall, with the same professor that's still doing your design studio, how about we just say an extra hour, at 3 extra hours, so that 15 hours a week that the professor is going to be in the studio. And that would be far more informative rather than having them as separate classes. And then I guess pedagogically, it is kind of nice to force the student to create their own connections between the classes. But also, I do think that it should be considered how to interweave these courses into the design studio. Same with environmental technology. You know, it's very hard mixing, your very theoretical studio about, a ballet center in the Bronx with, CVAC systems.
But again, I'm going to use my own experience. We
Yeah,
used
yeah,
to
yeah.
have a thing called Super Studio when I was at MIT, and the people of the building technology professor and the studio professors, based on the Super Studio kind of concept, they used to work together so that the structures professor would use the actual studio project for their structures, for their midterm and finals of their in their course. So instead of designing a random bridge somewhere, for example, you would design a bridge that related to your project or related or some structure that was part of your project, and that became part of your final presentation. And I think they integrated other stuff. Do you think that's a good model, or there's still more that needs to that we need to integrate?
That I think that is the first step, but I think, in terms of integration, I would love to see a way to see how we could incorporate 20th century history outside of the realm of architecture. So, First World War, Second World War, global events into the architecture studio, taking that even a step further.
I see. That's very interesting. So you're saying aside from so disintegrating the structure of the curriculum and kind of merging them all together in a way that kind of feels that they're more integrated, as opposed to taking a history course and taking a sociology course and then taking studio, somehow allowing them all to merge together and then manifest in a project.
Exactly.
It's kind of the one of the issues with that may be the fact that all schools have to abide by the NAAB rules, regulations. Do you feel that's a problem for architectural education based on what you're describing? That it limits us as opposed to.
I think it's a problem across every discipline, which is that this is not unique to architecture, but if you're a lawyer, doctor, et cetera, you tend to stay focused within the realm of your profession. But psychology in architecture, for example, philosophy in architecture, there are so many interconnections between all of these disciplines that I think it is more limiting to not look outside of architecture than to just stick within architecture.
Right. Now, aside from the humanities and building technology, etc., do you feel the need to learn more about the practice of architecture at the moment, or not?
I always feel that. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like everyone should, just constantly want to learn. I mean, right now I'm getting I do have this restless feeling where I really want to get out and start practicing,
Yeah, I see. Lots of people feel that way that I've spoken with. Why is that in your case?
I just want to feel like because this kind of ties into a question about why I want to become an architect, which is that right now I feel like all the work I'm doing is simply for myself, but I wanted to become an architect because I thought it was a service to others, to create design spaces and constructs that enhance people's lives, or provides an opportunity for people to meet and learn more effectively. And right now in architecture school, and it's a necessary step to get to where I would like to be, but it just feels like I'm a little bit in limbo, where my work is not necessarily affecting people's lives, but in my head, I'm theoretically seeing how it could.
How could it do? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do? You bring a social kind of social entrepreneurial or social agenda to the design, to the architecture studio, so that you can always resolve an architectural problem with a social aspect in your mind. Is that how you do it?
I mean, I think that a lot of architectural problems can be solved through enhancing social interaction and creating spaces that encourage people to interact with each other in a positive manner. And I mean, I feel like many architects say this, but how you approach it is, I'm still in school. I'm still trying every which way to see which one works,
Yeah.
which one I think works.
What do you want to do as an architect? You can't wait to get out there and practice, but what is it that you want to really do? Do you have a well-formatted dream, or like a purpose that is a very strong purpose that you want to start going after that?
This is within the past year, I've kind of become not obsessed, but very focused on this idea of becoming a city architect within the United States. Whether
city and architect?
A city architect. So I would work for a local government. So, and a big city like Houston, Los Angeles, New York, it's a pretty big responsibility. And I think that is a way that I could be of service in the most effective way.
Oh, that's interesting. We don't hear that much. So actually working for the Department of Buildings or something, or something?
Yeah.
Or being like a commissioner, like Bob Moses once was, or something like that.
No, not being commissioned, actually working for the city government, like having a position where that as a city architect, you approve certain constructions, and you also look to see if you can waive certain, regulations. So you make a lot of decisions about how people can build within their urban context.
It's awesome. After we finish, I'm gonna recommend you, if you want, to get in touch with a former colleague of mine from MIT. She actually does that, so she's pretty high up. So maybe you want to talk to her. So, do you feel that your architectural education is preparing you to become the leader that you want to become?
Yes. But there's also, I think Cooper's given me every single opportunity to become the leader I want to become. It is more of a willingness to take those opportunities, which is something that an architecture school is. No one's going to force you to, not fail this class. You're going to figure out you failed at the end of the semester when you get your letter grade. No one's going to come after you. You have to take initiative.
And no one, usually I don't remember anyone who's failed in my knowledge, but maybe you know someone. But no one failed architecture school in my experience. And that's by the way.
I know every year, freshman class starts with 40, and then your thesis here is 11 people.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, it's very cutthroat,
Uh-huh.
But
yeah. So go on. Sorry. Yeah.
No, sorry, I lost my train of thought completely.
Sorry, man. I should stop interrupting you. So the question was, as far as becoming a leader in the building industry, does architecture education help you do that?
Cooper provides every opportunity to do such. It is me, I would say that I need to start taking more initiative as a student and taking more responsibility for using those opportunities. Like, we have internship opportunities that are sent out every week via email. We have, job fairs where there's not even enough students to fill all the firms that come to visit.
Really?
Yeah. But time management, even though I think I'm decent at it, it's still hard, outside of the studio and, with all your other classes and trying to maintain a social life and a relationship with family and friends, to also take opportunity.
So what interferes with your education? What's in your way? What's the obstacle? As far as choosing to do the right thing.
This is a little bit speaking more broadly about my experience as a young person, but being 21, 22 in New York City.
Yeah.
Like you have friends, you have girlfriends, boyfriends, You know,
Right.
you want to live a social life too, but then also with architecture, I know I committed to a profession that is going to take up so much of my time, and I'm going to have to sacrifice a lot of those moments. And it's, for me, it's more about finding a balance between my social life and my work life that keeps me happy.
All right. So time management is one thing that makes absolute sense. But aside from that, you're saying Cooper provides you with all the opportunities. As far as what, for example, in your case, what does Cooper not provide you with, as far as things that you need to become the city architect, the city leader, design leader that you want, the way that you want to do? What is missing from your education?
It's just hard to speak ill about your school when you're so like devoted. I feel like I'm very biased, but
Well, I mean, it's your attempt to, when you externalize,
right, a useful critique. The one thing I would say is that Cooper does have this fetishization of kind of old ways of working, like hand drafting and descriptive geometry. I don't know how many people actually still have learned how to do descriptive geometry by hand with calipers. I spent a whole semester of my life every Thursday pulling an all-nighter for a whole semester with calipers tracking hundreds of little dots to do, projected orthographic geometry. And I do understand the useful of it because, it is the underlying logic to programs like Rhino, AutoCAD, just general thinking about geometry. But I don't need to spend that much time on it. I would rather learn how to use V-Ray or Maxwell, something that is, a requirement to in turn work at a lot of firms, which is something I still struggle with.
What about?
So I would say technology, every year staying up to date with the profession because, I feel like the new versions of Revit and AutoCAD and Rhino that come out, there's always so many new commands and features to use that create a more efficient workflow, allow opportunities for more efficient design. That's the only downfall of Cooper Union, I would say.
What do you think Cooper is, quote unquote, fetishizing traditional techniques?
It seems to a lot of the older professors that it is a rite of passage, that they came up at this time where in the 80s and 90s, they were shifting away from hand drawing into digital CAD drawing. And, it made their workflows so efficient. They could, do a drawing in half the amount of time and iterate that drawing so much faster. But also, there's kind of this idea that every professor I've had has gone like, well, we used to have to draft that by hand, or, we can laser cut our models. So I feel like in the first year, they kind of force you to go through these processes to appreciate the advents of technology and how useful they are. This is what I think the fetishization is. I think it's like not hazing. Hazing sounds extreme, but a form of such.
Right. But as far as becoming a leader in the building industry, or achieving your goal as an architect, do you feel that you're missing exposure to more pragmatic aspects of the profession, such as management skills, business skills, stuff like that?
Yes, yeah. That's exactly what I'm saying. Is that like I don't know how to use Revit, and I would love to learn.
Aside from
like the business skills, like just basic.
We're talking about business.
I'm only in my third year. I know that in the fourth and fifth years there are more classes focused on that, but I think that I think in high school, we should start teaching children about money management, taxes, very basic things like that, how to be a person in society. And and I would say that across the spectrum, I would love to have those business management classes and those classes where I learn how to theoretically deal with subcontractors and clients starting my freshman year.
Now, how do you propose that happens, considering that you have very limited exposure to the tools of the trade kind of, as well as the thinking of the profession. Do you feel that if you did that from your first year would interfere with the philosophy of architecture, or would it be a good thing?
Well, it depends on what your philosophy of architecture is and your approach to that particular philosophy. So you can view it as, I guess, the very neoliberal capitalist way of thinking about architecture is that keep building because it will ultimately benefit more people. And then you can think about it on the more leftist, socialist, communist spectrum, which is that I want to build strictly in service for others, no money, I don't care about money. And we're not going to overthrow American capitalist society. We're going to exist within a society where that things are about money, that labor is an asset, time is an asset, and quite frankly, like, we need to start teaching kids younger that that's the real world and not pretend that, they're not going to have to go work in an architecture firm where they're going to be making $50,000 a year living in New York, paying, half of that to their rent.
What do you think? What do you think about that reality, by the way? I want to get back to what we were discussing now, because I think that's a very interesting point you're making, but I also want to discuss from a different point of view. But what do you think about the reality of having to actually make a living in large urban centers to pay, those? I mean, I don't know in your case, but some people, for some people, architectural education costs multiple thousands of dollars.
Right.
60,000, 50,000. So if you take a loan to do that, so MArch education is what, 3.5 years. So that's a total of close to 200,000, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's if you take a loan on that, then on top of that, you have to live in a large city to pay that loan off, because that's where the bigger salaries are, and you have to pay higher rent and all that stuff. So what do you think about that reality as far as the cost versus benefit realities of the profession?
I mean, there's my idealist thoughts about it, which is that I hate it, and I think that the government should provide free college education and free healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. But that's more, I think that architectural education, given the current starting rates of a salary in the profession, are not, there's a huge gap. And especially given the amount of hours worked, that I feel like architects, this is from a young person's perspective, but I feel like I've already seen it, which is that the people who are really in charge are the people who are funding the project, so developers, etc. And sorry, I keep losing my train of thought.
Yeah, we're talking about whether it makes the cost benefit
right.
in the profession makes sense, considering the realities.
Don't be an architect if you don't love it, because you'll just be mad that you're not making more money the whole time. I would honestly, people think architects make a lot of money, and it's a decent salary. It's like, you will live a comfortable life, but you are not going to be rich. And if you care about money, go into finance or business or something, but do architecture because you love architecture.
Right. But do you feel that architecture gives you as an education, gives you the ability to branch out beyond the limited kind of square of the profession itself, or making buildings, quote unquote, to become something else? Do you feel that your education
100%.
Yeah. Like what? What kind of other careers do you feel that you're equipped to pursue outside this?
Studio art, ceramics, industrial design, teacher, basic engineering, advertising, honestly. There are just so many things that architecture school has taught me how to do effectively. But another thing is that architecture school is like, in my experience working outside of architecture school, I was head studio assistant for an artist named Gene Kegel in Jersey for a few months, and he went to UCLA architecture school, and he worked as a practicing architect for years, but now he's, established studio artist. I had a friend whose father worked for Gensler for years, and now he is an exhibited potter at MoMA in LACMA.
Oh,
So architecture opens up, I feel, so many opportunities that the list would be very long.
so in that sense, maybe we could argue that the exposure to the potential career of the architect is really kind of limited, and that architecture schools, perhaps when they teach architectural practice, they should begin expanding a little bit and kind of opening people's horizons to other careers. Do you feel that way? Or?
Definitely, and I think Cooper is doing that already.
How?
How? I would say that we have the choice to take a lot of electives in third year, fourth year, and fifth year, which means that we can go to the engineering school and to the art school. I spent a whole semester taking a freehand drawing course for 4 hours every Friday night, and that was a 3-credit course. So that was as important as my history of architecture course.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that more schools should incorporate that, and that Cooper is already starting to do that, but I would like to see more of it.
And how important do you feel that the experience of the individual architecture student is to their own educational experience, to their own education? Like, for example, your experience in the city of New York, as well as generally kind of absorbing everything around you. How important is that for your education?
I would say it's hugely important.
Right.
Especially because the way that I approach architecture is a social practice. Being in New York, you're exposed to so many different types of people.
Right.
Yeah, class, gender, religion, everything. And you can use that to inform how to design for everyone, not just a particular group of people. That's what I say the most informative thing about being in New York is that the exposure to so many different cultures, religions, beliefs, that I feel like I'm a more effective designer.
But you mentioned in the beginning that school does not allow you enough time to do that, right? Because the
right. That's
in the studio.
Yes.
So how do you bring the two together? How do you create a situation where all the experiences somehow, I don't know, distill into something productive that you could, as an educator, say, that's measurably something positive for one's education.
Like a structured class that exposes you more to the city outside of just that rigorous academic environment.
Right, something that structures that individual experience. The independent experience is fantastic in New York, and through osmosis you pick up all kinds of things, but it's not well structured. So you can, it's universal for everybody, whether it be you or someone else who's not studying at Cooper, that they have the New York experience. But how do you structure that experience so that it becomes useful to an architect, a future architect? So it becomes part of the curriculum. Because I think that's where your proposal lies, right? You're proposing something like that.
Right, where's the structure lay?
You feel that this should happen through integrating it with studio, or what?
I think through integration with studio, which we already spoke about, but also responsibility lies on the student, that if you don't have someone breathing down your neck telling you what to do, that you have to take ownership for your education and use, if, for example, this is my art professor, we had an assignment where we had to go sit on the 6th subway and do blind contours of people, staring at them for minutes, complete strangers. And I did not love doing that, but it was, I don't think I could have really done that in any other city. And it is, assignments and projects like that that force you to get outside of the building and, engage with the larger public. That's not a great example, but it's an example nonetheless of how professors can give assignments and projects that get you outside of the classroom.
Great. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, if you want to talk about it, the process of applying and stuff like that, the process that you went through. How would you describe it from your point of view? Obviously, every time that we work with someone, it's a different thing, but how would you describe it from your point of view?
The process of applying is difficult because there's a lot of insecurities, like, am I good enough? And, you're going to have to learn to deal with failure. You're not going to get in everywhere. You might not get into your dream school. You might not get the scholarship that you want to your dream school, but the process of applying prepared me via, the mentorship that I had through architecture portfolio review or school review, was that it prepared me for an architectural education more than my architecture classes at Bennington College did.
Mm-hmm. Can you be more specific in that?
So in terms of expectations and iteration of design, you had me do hundreds of drawings for just one project, and then after I did like 500 drawings for just a proposal for a project I could do, you'd say, nah, it's not working out, and we'd start all over again.
Right.
But that was, in the moment it sucks, but in hindsight, that did so much for me in being able to realize early on in the process of designing if an idea is going somewhere. And
sorry, continue.
Yeah, if an idea is going somewhere, and how to work through it and iterate to get it to a place where that is where it should be.
And what was what you mentioned before is interesting. When I would say, for example, it's not working out, deep inside I felt it is working out because I just have to squeeze this guy as much as I can to produce, 10 times better than he could, than he has already. Ironically, you have to go through these ugly phases of, mediocre sketches until you get to where you need to go. Normally, we begin with strategy and all that stuff, right?
Right.
So did you feel that the process that we followed was a little unorthodox, starting with the essay and then developing the actual work? Or because I remember you couldn't wait to jump in and get things done, but I was stepping on the brakes at that point. But what do you feel about that process?
I think that the essays and the writing and all of this kind of contextual information about you makes the portfolio and the application stand out so much more because everything is intertwined. Every aspect of the portfolio is representative of the individual. It's not generic. Like you couldn't, my portfolio would not work for another person. And that is why I'm certainly sure that all those essays and contextual information informs that, because I remember by the time my portfolio was done, I was like, this feels like an extension of myself. Mm-hmm. This feels like it's mine. And I think a lot of that probably had to do with, the amount of, in-depth information you get to know about the person.
I would love to show your portfolio in a little video if it's okay with you.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. I really love your portfolio. It's one of my favorites because of how poetic it is and because of the reference to people that were actually important to you, right?
Right.
So we mentioned, can you talk a little bit about the people that were the bases of your different projects, and why, and how did that bring together an idea about what Rollin really is, about who he is?
I think the project that really encapsulates, what I was trying to go for in my portfolio was the ceramics project, where, my uncle and my father have been collecting Japanese ceramics since I was a child. And, the idea of a water jar just inherently gives me the sense of comfort and, remembrance of my uncle. And, the act of pottery also does that too. But also letting go of certain ideas about childhood. And when I broke the pot and reconstructed it for this, inhabitable sculpture that was in Japan, but, I did it with clay from the States. It also kind of represented me moving around a lot. That project really kind of encapsulated how all the projects in my portfolio were, which was they represented an interest of mine, my historical experience growing up, and also my familial relations to people.
Spectacular. And what was your favorite project? You mentioned what your favorite project was. What was your second favorite project, as far as not so much concept, but in terms of media use?
The Piranesi drawing, I love that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, that drawing exercise is. I mean, I still love Piranesi to this day. Like
because of that exercise.
Yeah, because of that exercise. I also couldn't draw before then. So
do you feel that we sure went through a lot of drawings, but do you feel that your drawing ability improved? And did you bring that into your education at Cooper? Did it help you a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I look at drawings from years ago that I did, like quick doodle sketches, and I'm like, this cannot communicate anything.
Yeah.
From simple minute sketches to 40 hours long, ultra detailed pen and ink drawings. I learned how to be intentional with my strokes, how to control different mediums, and how to read light and space and create those spaces with emotion and depth in a drawing, which I could not do before.
Perfect. And do you feel that you can think better as an architectural student because of the fact that, thanks to this drawing? Because before you were saying how you disagree with Cooper's fascination with traditional techniques.
I'm talking about like orthographic hand drawing and descriptive geometry.
I see. So you feel that there is a place for more expressive drawing in architecture education?
Yeah, freehand drawing.
Yeah.
Charcoal on a huge piece of newspaper, like
that's huge.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, that's an experience. I mean, if you've done it, you know.